I'd like to thank the Johnson Center for allowing me to speak today. This is actually one of the most popular webinars that I have because everyone that I know, whether or not you have a child with special needs to know how to reduce their tax liability. And so this is going to be a pretty packed webinar. I'm going to have a lot of information. Matter of fact, I was doing this at the last minute last night, putting in more information. And the only regret I have is that I won't be able to talk about the new Health Care Act, but that will be another webinar that I will present in the near future. Our topic today is medical expense tax deductions, and this is a summary to help the disabled and their families with their health care cost. And if you'd like, you can visit my website during or after the webinar at B.I.T.E.Your.com. And I need to give a little disclaimer before we begin this. The content provided in this seminar is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I have done my best to provide the most up-to-date and relevant information regarding taxes, but I am not responsible for any problems, errors, or omissions that may arise if using any of the recommendations as tax advice. This information is for non-professional use only. And I'd also like to take the time right now to just let you know that I'm not the most professional speaker in the world. I might stumble on my words, I might have to backtrack, but I feel as if this information is just too important not to share with y'all. And I hope you get the information that you're looking for here. And I also want to thank you again for showing up. I am an accountant. I'm the author of Bite Your Bills, Cutting Medical Expenses for the Disabled. And I am the mother of a beautiful 7-year-old boy with autism. I'm also the mother of a 4-year-old neurotypical princess. And my book is available through my website. It's also available through Amazon, but I will be having some special offers today that are only available through my website. So during the webinar, I'm going to pick 5 participants who will win a copy of my book, and this is the second edition. Subtitle is How I Got $28,000 Back in Medical Expenses from My Son's Autism Therapies. So I want to give you a little quote from the President. He said, "I trust that the Congress will give its immediate consideration to the problem of future taxation. Simplification of the income and profits taxes has become an immediate necessity." I forgot to mention, though, that that was President Woodrow Wilson about 100 years ago. So we're still having tax issues today, and to be quite honest, I don't think the majority of our tax issues will ever be resolved. But your goal as an American taxpayer, and I want to mention briefly, there was someone asking about Canadian taxes. This is only for American taxes. Your goal as an American taxpayer is to reduce your tax liability as legally low as possible, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I also want to mention briefly the method that I used, that I created, in which I got back $28,000 in medical expenses in 2 years. And as you could see here, there's 4 items, and taxes is one of the 4 items that helped me get my money back from medical expenses. I want to talk briefly about the other 3 items in order for you to understand how the method works so that it is a year-round medical savings plan. So here are some of the highlights. Under the budgeting section of the book, what I recommend is creating a medical savings checking account. My husband and I have a checking account solely for my son's medical expenses. As for health insurance, my recommendation is to find the best insurance you can afford for your disabled child, and look into government-assisted or individual insurance for other dependents and your spouse that may not need as many medical expenses as your disabled dependent. And I talk about that in detail in the book. The next step is taxes, which we will talk about later. And then the last one is the employer-sponsored health plans, such as health savings accounts and flexible spending accounts, also known as cafeteria plans. And my recommendation in the book is that you contribute the maximum amount to those. And I also have a mini webinar available at B.I.T.E.Your.bills.com on how to prevent and handle denied health insurance claims. There were quite a few questions during the registration process that wondered about how I can, or how a person can fight denied health care claims. So I talk about that in a separate webinar. So as the parent of a special needs child, this is what your attitude should be about taxes. And this has helped me get through the tax season. The first thing you should know is, unfortunately, tax season is all year, especially for us parents who have to keep track of all the expenses, all the medical expenses, all the medical mileage expenses, because it really does rack up. And you should not think of tax season just being between January 1st to April 15th. You have to have the mindset that it is all year. And I explain that in my book as to why you should have that mindset, because it really does help with your record keeping. The second thing is that if you're overwhelmed and you can't find all of your expenses before the April 15th deadline, and I'm actually guilty of that too, you should talk with your CPA or tax professional about filing an extension, whether or not you believe you owe or are due a refund. You have until October 15th to find and apply all legitimate expenses. The third thing you should think about is to file an amended return for medical expenses not filed from previous years. You have 3 years from the date of the original return to amend that. Number 4, which I think is just as important as the other 3, is find an organizational technique that fits your personality. What I mean by that is, are you more comfortable with having a file cabinet tucked away in the garage? Do you like to have your information right in front of you? And number 5 ties into that. Use the documentation tool best suited for you, such as, personally, I like to use a file cabinet and document scanning. Some people just like paperwork being filed away, and some people like a combination. So find the one that best suits you. And that leads me to my next slide. I'm adding a little bit of humor here. I forgot that tax season was all year. And this and other, I hope, humorous pictures are in my book. Just to add a little humor, it can be a very stressful time for some people. So let's talk about adjusted gross income. And at this point, if you are able to, and if you would like to have a printed copy of the Form 1040, which will be shown in the next couple of slides, but if you'd like to have the paper, a printed handout, what I would recommend right now is go to irs.gov, and what you will find on the middle left of the home page is a section called Forms and Pubs. From there, choose 1040, and it will take you directly to the PDF version of the 2012 tax form. And if you'd like, you can print that out and just follow along in this section. So about adjusted gross income, this is something that you should think about throughout the year as to how to lower your AGI, because that's going to be your goal. Because currently the medical expense threshold is 7.5% of AGI. And let me give you a quick example of what that means. Let's say that your AGI is $100,000. Your medical expense threshold is 7.5% of that $100,000. What that means is that the first $7,500 of medical expenses are going to be included in the threshold. So for example, let's say you have $8,000 in medical expenses. Your threshold is $7,500. What that means is you take the difference, which is $500. That $500 is part of the medical expense tax deduction. I know it may seem a bit unfair for most families because you're thinking, I would really like to deduct the entire $8,000, but that is how the tax code works. And I wanted to talk to you about that threshold. So the unfortunate thing about this is that starting in 2013 tax year, the medical expense threshold for taxpayers under 65 years of age will now rise to 10%. So your goal is to lower your AGI using a health savings account, but also decreasing your income items and increasing your expenses. So the lower your AGI is, the lower your tax threshold, the more medical expense deductions will be possible. So let me backtrack on that last example. Let's say you didn't take advantage of decreasing your income items and increasing your expenses. So your AGI is $100,000, okay? But let's say you did. Let's say you were able to find items that lowered your AGI to $50,000. That's a little bit of a stretch, but help me on this because I'm really bad with math today. What happens is that actually, instead of it being $7,500, it's going to be half of that. So you're going to actually have, let me add this here, $3,750 will now be your new threshold. So let's say you had $8,000 in medical expenses. Well, instead of only getting $500 as a medical expense tax deduction, you're actually going to have $4,250 as a medical expense tax deduction. So you really want to try to lower that AGI. So on the next slide, I show you a screenshot of what the 1040 looks like, and this is for 2012. And if you have the actual printout of the Form 1040, you are going to look in the middle of your printed page. And this is the first page. I know that there are 2 pages that print it out. So look at your first page and look in the middle and look to the left where it says income. So that's what we're talking about right now. So any line item on this section that is a positive number increases your AGI, your adjusted gross income. Your goal is to either have no income or negative income from any of these line items. So for example, let's say you own real estate, rental real estate, and you incurred a loss for the year 2012. Your negative income may lower the AGI, and I say may lower because you will have to speak with a tax professional on how this can be done legally. So if you look at line item 17, that would be under rental real estate. If you have a negative number there, that lowers your total income, if you see that on line 22, which is your AGI. So on the next slide, which is the next section on the printed Form 1040, you will see that to the left, you will see adjusted gross income, and these are the expenses. Any line item on this section that is a positive number decreases your AGI. And your goal in this section is to have as many expenses here as legally permissible. For example, let's look at line item for the health savings account deduction, which is line 25. What you want to do is you want to use your health savings account to its maximum amount, and this may lower your AGI. So having a health savings account and taking full advantage of it is actually part of the Bite Your Bills method that I talk about in my book, and I give examples on how to do that. So all of these line items that you see are possible deductions that can lower your AGI. And what I would like all of you to do, if you are able, is to print out this Form 1040. And I want you to think about, not just for the past tax year, but for this tax year, think about what you can do this year to increase your expenses and to lower that income. And you might want to talk with your financial professional about that. They might have some great advice for you on that. So let's go to the tax deductions to-dos. Do you know who your dependents are? And my book covers who is and who is not a dependent, and it's pretty interesting as to who is and who isn't. You'd be surprised. You can also go to the IRS website and look under Publication 501, that's Publication 501, for more information on that. Have you maximized your HSA, that is your health savings account, and your FSA contributions, that's a flexible spending account? Unfortunately, starting this year, the flexible spending account contributions are now limited to a $2,500 annual contribution. And for some families with special needs children, that is a big hit. From what I've read in chat rooms and from what I heard from my special needs families, is that they sometimes use this money for special education. So I kind of have a beef about the health care law, because that was one of the provisions. And I'm hoping that that might be repealed, because I know a lot of families who need any additional money, and they usually use it through the flexible spending account. And as for the HSA, in 2012, if a family is covered under a high deductible health plan, which I explain in my book what that is and how it ties into the HSA, with the high deductible health plan, the maximum contribution is $6,250. What that means is that if you use that maximum amount, that can actually be put into the Form 1040 that I explained before, which will actually lower or may lower your AGI. So you want to take advantage of that. Will you be penalized with the alternative minimum tax? Now, I don't want to get a migraine right now, so I'm not going to discuss that. That is just, what do they call it? The 800-pound gorilla, the elephant in the china shop. It is just a monster. It is a Medusa, and I simply do not want to talk about it. Let your CPA have the migraine for you. The next one is, are you eligible for all or some of the child tax credits? And there is a few tax credits that most families, with or without special needs dependents, can use. And one of the biggest ones, is probably the credit for child and dependent care expenses. That credit is for expenses relating to caring for a dependent under age 13 or for a spouse or dependent unable to care for themselves. The earned income credit, that is a credit for families with low incomes and dependents. Another one is the child tax credit, and that is a credit for a child under 17 who can be claimed as a dependent on a taxpayer's return. And there's quite a few more. I list those in my book, and you can also check that out via the IRS publications. And the next slide is another little bit of humor. This is from my book, Bite Your Bills, and this is Fake Tax Tips, number 34-A. Your dog is not your dependent, no matter how cute he is. So let's talk about what a medical expense is. And this is taken from the IRS publication 502, Medical and Dental Expenses. And I feel this publication is so important that if you are having difficulties figuring out what medical expenses are deductible, I would really suggest that you look through that. I have examples in my book, but I feel as if publication 502 is just so important, especially for us families caring for a special needs dependent. What they state is that a medical expense is the cost of diagnosis, cure, treatment, or prevention of disease, and the cost for treatments affecting any part or function of the body, payments for legal medical services rendered by physicians, and other medical practitioners. So one of the most common questions that I received from the webinar attendees is what kind of medical expenses can be claimed. Now, if the medical expense follows what the IRS requires here, then there should be no issues as to the deductibility of that medical expense item. However, there are other requirements that must accompany this criteria, and those details are discussed in my book. And there is no age requirement to receive a medical expense tax deduction. I know that was a pretty common question that I got when you all registered. From birth to death, if a medical expense follows this criteria and other requirements, it should be covered as a medical expense tax deduction. And the details are in my book about what a legal medical expense or legal medical service is, and who a medical practitioner is, and what products and services are not eligible as medical expenses. So let's get into a little more specifics about the tax deductions for medical expenses. Let's talk briefly about medical food items, alternative holistic treatments, supplements, special education, and transportation. So summary of the medical food items, those are families who choose to go on gluten, casein, soy-free diets. You may have heard the specific carbohydrate diet, the low ketone diet. Whatever diet this is that a physician has prescribed for you or your child, that is what we considered a medical food item. And this could possibly be bread, crackers, even cookies, pastas. All of these are possible deductible food items. Like I mentioned, a prescription is required for this. And little detail about the prescription, I would recommend getting it from your physician. A nutritionist possibly, but in regards to this, I would really want to have a physician sign off of this, stating what the child should not be eating, and that this diet should be followed for the life of the child. So what you do is you take the difference between the medical food item price and the price of a similar regular food item, and that difference is the deductible amount. A quick example, a regular loaf of bread is $5, or sorry, a regular loaf of bread is $2. You have special bread that costs $5, so you take the difference of that, and that's $3. The $3 is the deductible amount for that medical food item. But there are some other requirements, and the instructions on creating a medical food expense database is available in my book. Excuse me, sorry about that. So the next section is about alternative holistic treatments and supplements. So according to the IRS, what are the requirements to be a licensed or certified medical practitioner? And my research shows that there is none, and it's detailed in my book. But please note that the tax law differs from the medical establishment's requirements for medical practitioners. The requirements for any medical treatment, whether it's traditional, holistic, or alternative, you need to have documents, you need to have prescriptions from your doctor stating the medical condition. It might help having medical journals about the condition. Here's another fake tax tip. I'll let you read it. Sorry about that, I got a little tickle in my throat. If you see me pause or you hear me pause, that's probably the reason why. So let's talk about special education. What types of education are considered medical expenses? What are the tax court case examples that can help us? And what type of education is not a medical expense? So what I'm going to do right now is, if you hear any paper shuffling in the background, I'm going to my book because I talk about that there. So, education as a medical expense. Let me read briefly from the book. So, the tuition, meals, and lodging of attending a special education school that helps a child in overcoming a learning disability is a medical expense. The cost of a qualified teacher trained to tutor children with learning disabilities is also a medical expense. And I give it details on that in the book. So, first thing is that the school and the tutoring must be recommended by a doctor. The learning disability must be caused by a mental, physical, or nervous system disorder. The main reason for attending the school must be to overcome the learning disability. And please note that this is not an educational expense. It is a medical expense. And there are some tax court examples. One of them was a child of above average intelligence who became withdrawn and incapable of functioning normally at school. She had some outbursts and other abnormal activities that affected her studies. So she had a psychiatrist who recommended a private school treating emotionally fragile children with their learning disabilities. So this, the IRS did not approve initially of the medical expense deduction. So the family took it to the tax court. And the United States tax court ruled that the school did qualify as a medical expense because the school was, quote, an institution to further her medical treatment, unquote. And it was also a scholastic program that provided the necessary services to eliminate the emotional barriers to her future normal scholastic success. And I know this information is a lot to absorb. That's why I give specific examples in the book. And it's interesting reading these tax court cases because there are many examples in which you think that this expense would be deductible, but it isn't, and the U.S. court gives its reasons why. So in a section of the book I'm going to read is my opinions on deductions for special education, and I will read this section in its entirety. Education for a specific disorder or disability in order to treat or alleviate the disorder may be a medical expense. Educational improvement for a child's attitude is not deductible. However, education for mental or emotional problems, let me backtrack on that. Number 3, education for mental or emotional problems, but no specific program for the disorder or the disability is not a medical expense. And I give examples in the book as to what that is. Education providing a regular curriculum is not a medical expense. However, if there is a special program alongside the regular curriculum for the specific disorder, that may be a medical expense. Educational improvement for poor study habits, weak academic subjects, and or disciplinary issues is not a medical expense. So there's quite a few things that you might think are medical expenses but are not. And this is something that, again, I explain in detail. I wish I could cover this more, but there's simply just not enough time. I have the information in the book. You can also talk with your tax professional about that. As a matter of fact, I would recommend that you do speak with them about that and that you speak with the school about their specific curriculum. And hopefully they will understand that the way their school, their curriculum is structured, that it will hopefully be considered a medical expense tax deduction and not just an educational expense. So I hope that answered a few questions about special education. Let's go on to transportation. I want to talk about the 2012 medical mileage rates. That is, for 2012, it's 23 cents per mile driven for medical purposes to and from your home, sorry about the grammar there, from your home to the medical office. And there's two types of transportation deductions. Most people just use the standard rate of 23 cents a mile, and you should have a mileage log with you. The other way of taking this deduction, which is actually something I do, but it's very document heavy, is that I use the actual expenses, which are my gas receipts and the cost of oil replaced in an oil change. And I give examples and details of that in the book, but I cannot stress enough how important it is to have some sort of a mileage log, some sort of documentation that shows your medical mileage, because for us families with a special needs dependent, we drive our cars quite a bit to and from offices and schools and tutoring, and that really adds up. You would be surprised as to the amount of mileage and the tax deductible amount that you can receive just from keeping all these receipts and keeping an accurate mileage log. So this is something that is, I have to admit, labor intensive, but I really think is worth it. So just remember that you should keep and organize receipts and statements on a regular basis. And what do I mean by that? I mean, for me personally, I can't go a week. If I go more than a week without recording and properly documenting my receipts and statements, it's just a mess. For some people, it might be less. You might have to do that every day or every other day. And that ties in again with having an organizational personality that's comfortable for you, whether it's just papers in a file cabinet or perhaps using Evernote, which is one of my favorite online applications for document storage. Whatever you feel comfortable with, just make sure you do it on a regular basis. Also remember that, unfortunately for us parents of special needs kids, tax season really is all year long. You have to keep your statements in order. You have to figure out what expenses can possibly lower your AGI. So you need to decrease those income items and increase the AGI or expense items. You also need to confirm that the medical expenses you have are tax deductible with your CPA or tax preparer. And I talk a little bit about that in the book, about unusual or alternative holistic medical expenses. And I wish I had time to talk about that, because more so than any other subgroup in the United States, I think a lot of parents with disabled children and adults turn to holistic and alternative treatments alongside traditional medical procedures. And I personally do. I actually use a homeopath and a chiropractor for my son's autism symptoms, and I state that in the book, how those expenses are tax deductible as a medical expense. Also, in regards to supplements, and that's something that is not on the screen here, supplements and vitamins are pretty tricky because usually they are not considered medical expense tax deductions. However, there are ways around that legally, in which you have a confirmed medical diagnosis from your physician and that you are using these supplements to help cure, treat, alleviate a medical condition. But again, I state that in my book what those are. And it's pretty interesting what is and is not a medical expense deduction when it comes to holistic treatments. So you can do this yourself. You don't need to buy my book. You don't need to talk with a tax preparer. You can do this yourself. It's going to take some work. And as you could see here on the screen, these are all the IRS publications that I recommend to understand the basics. I've read a lot more publications than these in order for me to complete my book. But if you want to start on the right foot, if you think you can do this yourself, these are the publications that you should read. Even if you do get assistance, I would still recommend that every family take a look at or print out IRS Publication 502. because that has a pretty nice list of actual medical expenses that are deductible. And let's see how much time I have. I think I might have a little bit of time. Let me turn to my book and I'll give you really quick examples of what medical expenses are deductible. So let's check some out here. I see laboratory fees. Let's see, hearing aids, guide dogs are possible medical expense tax deductions, breast pump and supplies, chiropractor, day camp. Let me talk about day camp really quick. You want to ask yourself a couple of questions about that. Does it incorporate physical and social improvement via recreational and/or leisure activities for the disabled population? And was the main reason for your child's attendance to treat, alleviate, cure, or mitigate her disability? Now, if the answer is no to that, there's also summer day camp expenses that may actually qualify for a tax credit under the Credit for Child and Dependent Care Expenses. And real quick, here are some of the requirements for that. Both parents must be working or looking for work. Up to $3,000 of 1 year's non-reimbursed expenses may be used to compute the credit account for one or credit amount for one child, and you have up to $6,000 for 2 or more children on that. So there's so many other deductions here that are there's a plethora of them. I'm sorry that I couldn't go through all of them. So going back to the slide, the other thing you have to do is read and understand the tax code. And this is the direct link via Cornell University. You could just Google, if you want, Cornell University Law School Internal Revenue Code, and that should pop up. And there's too many. There's so much more that I'd love to fit into this PowerPoint slide, but I don't want y'all to fall asleep, and we only have a limited amount of time here. So that's what I did. That's only a fraction of what I did to write this book for my fellow families of special needs kids. The other thing about the book, though, is that it's not just for the disabled and chronically ill. Anyone can use the method that I mentioned in the book to save on their medical expenses. So what can you do right now? If you want your tax refund now, there are VITA clinics throughout the U.S., and that's Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, and that is done through the IRS. There are volunteers available in most American cities that can help taxpayers prepare their taxes for free. Now, there are some restrictions. There's some income restrictions, so you might want to talk to them about that. But they are qualified to handle most tax returns. And the other thing you should do is you should submit your tax return on or before April 15th. And then after that time, if you have more time, you should hopefully, is you want to search for more deductions and then file an amended return if applicable. And you want to talk with your CPA or tax professional on how to do that. Well, let's say you owe. If you do owe, you need to pay what you owe on or before the 15th. And then afterwards, you need to search for more deductions and talk with your tax preparer about your findings to maybe get an amended return processed. Now, I say perhaps because you may or may not find a whole box full of medical expense tax deductions that will allow you a refund back. There may not be enough there. And that's something that you need to look through and talk to a tax professional about that. Let them know, hey, is there enough here for me to get a refund? Okay, this does not have to do with taxes, but I did receive quite a few questions when you registered for the webinar about this. What if you're having problems with your health insurance policy? What if you received a denied claim for something that you feel should be covered? Well, there's a couple things you can do. And I talk about this in detail in the book, and I actually have webinars discussing this topic. One of the things you could do is read your health insurance certificate. It might be called something else, health insurance plan. It's not the health insurance summary. This health insurance document is at least 75 pages long. The summary is only 10 pages. You do not want to read that. What you want to do is find out about what their grievance procedure is. There might be another word for it. How to protest your denied claim. And from what I understand, by law, every health insurance company in their health insurance certificate is required to tell you what their grievance procedure is. So if you have the time to do that, and if you feel as if you're up to the task, I say do that. If you don't have time, or if you feel that you need a professional on your side, somebody who knows the ropes, you might want to try a medical billing advocate. I don't have any organization that I recommend. You can Google medical billing advocate and you will find many groups that can help you with that. They might be able to negotiate a lower price of a medical procedure, even if it happened in the past, or if it's happening now, or if it's going to happen. And on Facebook a couple of nights ago I found a very interesting group called Patient Advocate Foundation. And if anyone is interested, you might want to take a look at that. So, what if you're having issues with the high cost of health care? I would suggest joining social media savvy health saving sites such as Simply, Cake Health. Cake Health is one of my favorites. Clear Health Costs, great articles on that. And Cost of Care. All of those are great examples on how to help you manage the high costs of health care, as well as the medical billing advocate. You can also subscribe to my B.I.T.E.Your Bills newsletter. I do have a monthly newsletter that details healthcare savings using my method. I talk with various experts on healthcare savings. I also have included with the newsletter a free mini webinar on today's healthcare savings topics. I also include exclusive online offers, information on extended detailed webinars and seminars. I also have available a customized medical food expense database, and that is actually electronic. I could send that to you if you don't feel comfortable customizing your own. I have one available that I use personally for my son's medical food expenses. And if you are interested in that newsletter, you can visit B.I.T.E.Yourbills.com for details. And I do have a special offer that is only available today. Also, what you could do is you could go online and subscribe for free to the blog. It's on the home page at the bottom right corner. It states subscribe to my daily blog updates, and you could do that too. Now, a little bit about the book. I want to talk about the book here. It is a unique method that I created. Now, I didn't create health savings account. I did not create flexible spending accounts. I did not create the tax code. But what I did was I took things that existed already and I created a 4-point guide that will hopefully give you year-round medical care savings. And it is a guidebook, and B.I.T.E. is actually an acronym. It stands for Budgeting, Insurance, Taxes, and Employer-Sponsored Health Plans. And today's webinar was just one of the 4 steps to hopefully getting medical expense savings. And I wanted to talk about